So it seems that you invented this technique, domain storytelling, throughout your career. You've been doing a lot of what you call it business modeling, right? Applying DDD as well, because from the name of it, we can see a little bit of mix of few things. First of all, there's a domain, which probably is domain-driven design. There's also a story. Maybe it correlates to user story. And there's the storytelling part, which is one technique, how you actually express the requirements or the things to be done. So maybe can you tell us a little bit history, how actually you ended up inventing this technique?
Well, I have to be honest, I didn't really invent it, but I did name it. There's this saying of standing on the shoulders of giants. That's the case here. So there were actually a couple of predecessors. One of them was a technique that I first learned when I joined this company for my internship and already used it, and they had a modeling tool for it. But it was a kind of enterprise modeling method with different model types. You could model organizational structures. You could model, let's say, a model of terms. You could model use cases. But there was also this one type of model that showed little stick figures that worked with what they called work objects. So let's say there's a stick figure called moviegoer, and then there's an arrow that says buys, and there's an icon of a ticket stop, and it says ticket. With this technique, for example, if you model going to the movies, then the story would evolve around this moviegoer and show us how does this moviegoer actually experience that? What do they do? What activities do they have? What objects do they work with? Do they interact with other people, with a cashier, for example? So it has all been there already, but it was a bit buried, I would say, in all these other model types and stuff. So what I did, again, together with my colleagues, for example, with Henning Schwentner, my co-author, what we did is we kind of distilled the essence out of that, made it easy to use without all that other baggage that the predecessors had. And we gave it a catchy name. And you're absolutely right, this domain. Well, of course, it's a story about the domain, about something that happens in a domain. But it's also a bit of a reference to domain-driven design, because we thought, well, this was really the key realization for us, because for years we've been working with this more university-shaped method and struggled to find people in the industry, in the software development community who got it, who understood it, and who said, well, yes, this is a good idea. And then when we found out about the DDD community, we said, well, this is our community. These are the people. They value collaborative modeling, they value visual modeling tools, they want to gain deep insight into a domain. This is the perfect tool for the DDD community, and hence I named it accordingly.
So it's really interesting, right? Because you have mentioned a couple of times about modeling, about domain. And one of particular line that I picked from the book, actually, this statement saying that misunderstandings between software developers and people from the business departments, or you can call it the business domain, are a common problem. So tell us more about this. Why do you think there are a lot of misunderstandings between developers or engineers and the business domain experts?
I think that has always been the case, at least in my experience. There are techniques in software development that people came up with that try to address this problem. For example, this whole agile methodology. I think one of the reasons that was invented or that people came up with it or that it became so popular is because, well, you want to bring together the people who know about the domain, who have the requirements, who will use the software, and the people who develop the software, and to try to find out about these misunderstandings early on, and not like the software developers for 2 years to work on the software, and then finally they ship it, and then the users say, that's not what I wanted. So domain storytelling and other visual modeling techniques, they're just additional means of helping mitigate this problem, because you get something very early on that gives stakeholders, domain experts, future users the chance to say, oh, that's not what I meant. No, that's not what I want you to build. So what we often do is you can use it for different purposes, this technique, but one of them is to learn about a domain. So if you're new to a domain, if you haven't worked on that before, if you're a contractor, for example, then you need to gain some initial domain knowledge. That's the first possible point where you can get misunderstandings by not understanding the concepts of the domain, the terms that people use. We can mitigate that by using domain storytelling in that phase, but we can also avoid misunderstandings when we model what we call to-be processes. So how do you want to use that software that we are going to build? How do you intend to use it? How is it going to change the workflows in your department, for example? We can model that. And that also uncovers misunderstandings. That's one of the major things I think about this method.
And hence, I think one of the biggest advice from that particular chapter is that to build a usable business software, you must first understand the domain. This is
Yeah.
sometimes not so counterintuitive for many engineers because they just read the requirement documents and just translate it, so to speak, maybe spec by spec or step by step. What do you think would happen if, let's say, developers really understand the domain before they actually start the work?
So I think one of the big advantages is that if you ask users what they want, they are often not great in articulating how a piece of software can help them with their problems because they're not experts in software development. They don't know about all the means available with modern technology, and it's not their job to know because they're the domain experts, they're not the software experts. So I think it's great if development teams have understanding about the domain, because then they can propose better solutions than if you just rely on, well, this is what the users told me what they want to have, and this is what I'm going to build. But maybe there are other better solutions out there. I think it's your job as a software developer to have these thoughts and think about how can I solve this problem for my users in the best possible way. And that's not necessarily the same solution that the future users have in mind. They're often limited by what they know. They are limited by existing software systems that they've become accustomed to use. So this additional out-of-the-box thinking, knowing about new technologies and stuff, that should be one of the advantages to leverage that knowledge that software development teams today have.